Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're diving into something really important for your health specifically. A type of swelling or bulge. It can happen in the body's largest blood vessel, the one running down through your belly.
That's right. We're talking about abdominal aortic aneurysms. And we've got a fresh stack of source material, brand new guidelines from the European Society for Vascular Surgery, just updated in 2024.
Wow, 2024, so really current.
Exactly. Think of these as the latest instructions, for doctors on the best ways to manage these bulges.
Our mission, to cut through the medical complexity in these guidelines. They're based on tons of recent research, right? Even patient experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. Patient input is becoming more central, and we want to pull out the absolute most important knowledge for you.
Right, so whether you or maybe someone you know is dealing with this or you're just keen to stay informed about staying healthy,
Right.
we want to make it clear, understandable.
We'll look at who should be screened, what happens if a bulge is found, how decisions about fixing it get made.
And sort of the latest thinking on managing it long term.
Precisely.
So settle in. We're taking a deep dive into the world of abdominal aortic aneurysm management. Explain simply for you.
Okay, maybe first things first. What exactly is an abdominal aortic aneurysm?
It's a starting point.
Well, picture your aorta. It's like the main pipeline, carrying oxygen-rich blood from your heart down through your chest into your abdomen, powers everything below. It's your body's biggest blood vessel.
The central highway, basically.
Exactly. An abdominal aortic aneurysm is essentially a weak spot in that section running through your belly. Over time, the wall weakens, starts to balloon outwards.
Like a bulge on an old garden hose when the pressure's high.
That's a perfect analogy. And that bulge is the problem because the biggest danger, the main fear, is that it could burst, rupture.
And the source material is pretty blunt about that, isn't it, if it ruptures?
It's a life-threatening emergency. The chances of survival are, frankly, not good if that happens.
Which is exactly why these new guidelines are such a big deal. They're trying to prevent that rupture.
Right. They incorporate the latest research, real-world data, to give doctors the clearest possible roadmap.
But it's interesting you mentioned that even with new studies, a lot is still based on what expert agreement.
That's a key point from the sources, yeah. Maybe around 70% is still based on expert consensus or smaller studies, not necessarily that highest level, large-scale evidence for everything.
So it tells us that even the experts are still learning, refining things as more information comes in.
Absolutely. It's a mix of the best evidence we have now plus experienced clinical judgment. It's always evolving.
Okay, so let's talk about finding these bulges.
Yeah.
Who should actually be screened for an abdominal aortic aneurysm?
Screening means using a simple test, usually ultrasound. It's painless, quick to look for these aneurysms before they cause trouble.
Before symptoms, before danger.
Exactly. And the guidelines strongly recommend this for specific groups, people who are at higher risk. The goal is finding it when it's smaller, safer to manage.
And who are those high-risk groups, according to the sources?
Okay, primarily men aged 65 and older. Especially if they smoke now or used to smoke, that's a big one.
Makes sense. What about family history?
Yes, crucial. Both men and women, any age, if they have a close relative, a parent, a sibling who had one, that puts you at higher risk.
Any other groups?
Also recommended for people, men or women, who already have bulges, aneurysms in other arteries, or people who've had organ transplants.
Okay. And it's just as important who is not generally recommended for screening, right? Based on the current evidence in these sources.
Correct. Based on this evidence, routine screening isn't generally advised for women in the general population or people of non-white ethnicity or even those with known heart disease, unless they also fall into one of those other high-risk categories, like the family history one.
So it's really targeted.
It is. Focused where the evidence shows it does the most good, prevents the most harm.
And does this targeted screening actually work? What's the impact?
Oh, absolutely. The sources are clear. Screening finds more aneurysms, allows for many more planned procedures to fix them safely.
And the crucial bit.
It dramatically reduces emergency ruptures and the deaths they cause. They even crunched some numbers for men, screening about 667 men, and treating just over one of them found through screening prevents one premature death from rupture.
Wow. So what this tells you, the listener, is that if you're in one of those high-risk groups, getting screened isn't just a checkup, it could genuinely be life-saving. Planned management, not a crisis.
Precisely.
Okay, so let's say you have the screening and they find a bulge. What happens next? You said it depends on the size.
Exactly. Doctors measure it, usually in millimeters, and the guidelines make this key distinction between small and large aneurysms.
Okay, let's take small first. How small is small?
The guidelines generally define small as less than 55 millimeters across for men and less than 50 millimeters for women.
Right. And for these small ones, what's the core advice?
This is really crucial. Planned procedures like surgery or the less invasive option are not recommended for men below 55 millimeters or women below 50 millimeter unless they're causing symptoms, which is pretty rare at this size.
That seems counterintuitive, maybe. If there's a problem, why not fix it?
It does, but the evidence here is very strong. Level A for men. The sources state clearly the risk of a small aneurysm bursting is incredibly low. For men under 55 millimeters, it's less than 1% per year.
Less than 1%.
Yeah, very low. And the key insight is that the risks involved in having a procedure, even a planned one, are actually higher than that tiny rupture risk when the bulge is still small. Trying to fix it too early could do more harm than good.
Okay, so if you don't fix it, what do?
The focus shifts entirely to something called surveillance. Careful watching.
Surveillance, meaning?
Regular checkups. Typically, repeat ultrasound scans maybe every year, maybe less often depending on the exact size, just to keep a close eye on it, to see if it's growing.
This feels like a really important point for listeners, because finding out you have one, even small, must cause anxiety.
Absolutely, it's natural to worry. But the guidelines, based on solid evidence, are saying the safest path is this careful monitoring. Sticking to that surveillance schedule is vital.
Okay, and I think the guidelines mentioned surveillance might stop sometimes.
Yes, in certain situations. For instance, in very elderly patients who have other serious health issues, if the aneurysm is small and unlikely to grow to a dangerous size within their expected lifespan, or if they wouldn't be fit for a repair procedure anyway, then ongoing scans might not be beneficial. That's a discussion with the doctor.
Got it, so that covers small. What about when the bulge is considered large?
Generally, large means 55 millimeters or bigger for men. For women, they suggest considering repair when it reaches 50 millimeters or bigger.
Why the difference for women?
Women tend to have smaller aortas to begin with, so the thinking is that a 50 millimeter bulge in a woman might pose a similar relative risk as a 55 millimeter one in a man.
And for these larger sizes, the advice changes significantly.
Yes. For men with aneurysms 55 millimeters or larger, a planned procedure to fix it should be considered. Notice the wording, considered.
Not automatic, but definitely on the table.
Exactly. This is the point where the balance shifts. The potential risk of that larger aneurysm rupturing starts to become greater than the risk of having the procedure to fix it.
And why does the rupture risk climb so much with size?
Think back to that garden hose analogy. The bigger the bulge, the thinner and more stretched the wall becomes, more stress on it. The sources quote the numbers. The annual rupture risk jumps from maybe 0.30–0.8% for under 55 millimeters up to around 3.5% for 55–60 millimeters and over 6% per year if it's over 70 millimeters.
So fixing it electively at these larger sizes is much safer than taking the chance of it bursting.
Generally, yes, and they deliberately avoid calling 55 millimeter a strict threshold. It's the point where the conversation about repair really begins.
And there's a psychological aspect too, right?
Definitely. Living with the knowledge of a large aneurysm can be stressful. Having it fixed, even electively, can bring significant peace of mind. That's a valid factor in the decision, too.
Okay, so size is obviously key. But the guidelines stress something else for everyone with an aneurysm, regardless of size. What's that?
This is a Class I recommendation, strong evidence. All patients diagnosed with an abdominal aortic aneurysm, no matter the size, should get intensive management of their cardiovascular risk factors. Basically focus on overall heart and blood vessel health.
And what does that intensive management actually involve?
It involves things you can actively work on. Number one, absolutely critical. Stop smoking. Smoking makes them grow faster and rupture more easily.
That makes total sense. Don't stress the weak spot.
Exactly. It also means careful control of blood pressure, managing cholesterol, often with statin medications. Sometimes antiplatelet drugs like aspirin might be used.
And lifestyle.
Yes, healthy diet, regular exercise, all part of it. The sources do mention, though, that even when these things are recommended, sometimes patient adherence isn't always perfect.
Right. But this is where the listener has real agency, isn't it?
Absolutely. Focusing on these things, quitting smoking, controlling blood pressure, healthy habits, taking prescribed meds isn't just for the aneurysm. It protects your whole cardiovascular system, reduces heart attack, stroke risk. It's a huge win-win.
Okay. So for those larger aneurysms where fixing it is being considered, the guidelines talk about the two main ways to do that.
Right. The two main options are traditional open surgical repair and the less invasive method, endovascular aortic repair.
Let's break those down. Tell us about the traditional open surgery first.
Okay, open surgical repair, or OSR. This involves a larger cut, usually down the belly. The surgeon goes in, directly gets to the aorta, clamps the blood flow for a bit.
Clamps the main pipeline. Wow.
Temporarily, yeah. Then they either remove or open up that bulging section and stitch in a replacement tube. It's usually made of a strong synthetic material, like Dacron. Think of it like cutting out the weak bit of pipe and putting in a sturdy new section.
Okay. Pretty major surgery then. What's the alternative?
The alternative is endovascular aortic repair, often called EVR, but we'll call it the less invasive repair. This is done through much smaller cuts, usually just in the groin area.
So no big belly incision.
Correct. Doctors use wires and catheters, thread it up through the blood vessels in your legs, right to the spot where the aneurysms is in your abdomen. Then they deploy a special device inside the aorta.
What kind of device?
It's called a stent graft. Picture a fabric tube, kind of like the Dacron material, but it's supported by a metal mesh frame, a stent.
Okay, like a reinforced sleeve.
That's a great way to think of it. It's positioned across the bulge, inside the aorta, and then expanded. This sleeve becomes the new pathway for blood flow, lining the weakened section from the inside, taking the pressure off the bulge wall.
And the sources say this less invasive way is often preferred now.
Yes, for most patients where the shape and location of their aneurysm is suitable for it, this less invasive approach is now the preferred method.
So how do they stack up against each other, open versus less invasive?
Well, the sources point out some key differences. In the short term, say, the first 30 days after the procedure, the less invasive repair generally has a lower risk of major complications and death compared to open surgery. It's less of an initial hit on the body.
Okay, that sounds like a clear win for the less invasive one.
Yeah.
But is it always better long term?
That's where it gets more nuanced, and the guidelines are honest about this. While it has that early survival advantage, studies looking out several years haven't shown a significant difference in overall survival between the two methods.
No difference in overall survival long term.
Not significantly in the major trials. And interestingly, after the first few years, patients who had the less invasive repair might actually have a slightly higher chance of needing more procedures later on.
More procedures after the less invasive one. Why is that?
It seems the internal stent grafts, while great up front, can sometimes develop issues over time. Things like small leaks around the graft or the graft shifting slightly. These might need follow-up interventions.
Whereas the open surgery, though tougher initially,
Often provides a very durable fix for the aneurysm itself, less likely to need reintervention at that specific site. However, open surgery has its own potential long-term issues, like a higher risk of developing a hernia where the big incision was. So if you count all types of later procedures, the difference might not be quite so dramatic.
Okay, so it's definitely not a simple choice. It's a trade-off.
Exactly. Faster initial recovery with the less invasive approach versus potentially fewer aneurysm-related reinterventions long-term with open surgery, but with the risks of a bigger operation up front and potential hernia later.
So how do doctors and patients actually decide which way to go?
It's very personalized. Key factors are the patient's overall health. Can they tolerate a big operation? The specific anatomy of the aneurysm, is it suitable for the internal stent graft?
Yeah.
And crucially, patient preference. What matters most to you? Faster recovery, minimizing potential future procedures. The guidelines really stress this shared decision-making.
Let's touch on that fitness for surgery point again. What goes into that assessment?
It's vital. Doctors do a thorough check: heart, lungs, kidneys, nutrition, your overall state. Age is a factor, as are existing heart, lung, or kidney problems. These things predict how well someone might recover.
So getting in the best possible shape before surgery is key.
Absolutely. And the guidelines specifically mention stopping smoking again, ideally well before surgery, significantly cuts down complication risks.
Okay. For the less invasive repair with the internal graft, you mentioned durability concerns. How do they ensure these devices last?
That's a major focus. The guidelines strongly recommend using stent graft models that have solid proof of long-term durability, ideally at least 10 years of good follow-up data showing they perform well.
And the sources give examples of why this matters, devices that didn't work out.
Yes, they mention a couple. One called Valiant Navayan, used in the chest but relevant, had unexpected late problems like parts of the frame breaking. Another, the Nelix device for abdominal aneurysms, actually had its production stopped due to unacceptably high failure rates discovered later on.
Wow. So rigorous testing and long-term tracking is essential for new technology.
Absolutely. It underscores the need for caution and solid evidence before adopting new devices widely.
And because these grafts are inside you, follow-up after the less invasive repair is really important.
Critically important. The guidelines stress that regular follow-up imaging, usually CT scans or sometimes ultrasound, is essential after the less invasive repair.
Why? What are they looking for?
They're checking the graft is still in the right place, that it hasn't shifted, and crucially, looking for any signs of those endoleaks we mentioned. They also check if the original aneurysm sac outside the graft is shrinking, staying the same size, or worryingly, getting bigger.
Right, the endoleaks. Can you explain simply what that is again?
Think of the stent graft as the new lining inside the bulging pipe. An endoleak means blood is somehow still seeping into the space between that new lining and the old, weakened outer wall of the aneurysm sac. The seal isn't perfect.
Is that always dangerous?
It depends on the type of leak. They classify them. Some types, called type 1 and type 3, mean blood is getting into the sac under high pressure, almost like the graft isn't fully working. These are high risk for rupture and usually need fixing quickly.
Okay. What about other types?
Type 2 is the most common. It's often from smaller side branches feeding back into the sac. It's generally considered more benign, lower pressure. But even these need watching, because if they cause the aneurysm sac to start growing bigger over time, they might eventually need treatment too. So that follow-up imaging is key to finding and monitoring any leaks.
Makes sense. Are there other potential problems after either type of repair?
The sources mention a few others, though thankfully most are uncommon. Graft infection is rare but very serious. Blood clots can sometimes form inside the stent graft, usually not a major issue but needs watching.
Anything else?
They mention sexual dysfunction, which can unfortunately occur after both open and the less invasive repair. Also, reduced blood flow to the colon called colonic ischemia, which seems a bit more common after open repair for ruptured aneurysms, and sometimes issues with blood flow down to the legs.
One last thing on imaging CT scans mean radiation. Is that addressed?
Yes, the guidelines highlight that. Minimizing radiation dose is important for both patients undergoing scans and the staff performing procedures. They mention using techniques like image fusion to help reduce the amount of radiation needed.
Okay, so we've covered the common scenario, but the sources also briefly mention other, maybe less common types of aortic issues.
Right. It's not always a straightforward bulge in the main abdominal section. Sometimes aneurysms are more complex.
Like involving branch arteries.
Exactly. The bulge might extend up to where arteries branch off to the kidneys or intestines. Repairing these is much trickier, needs specialized open surgery or more complex, often custom-made internal stent grafts.
They also mentioned bulges lower down.
Yes, in the iliac arteries, those are the main arteries going down into the pelvis and legs. They provide size guidelines for when those might need fixing, maybe if they get bigger than 40 or 50 millimeters.
And aneurysms caused by infection or inflammation.
Correct. Mycotic aneurysms are caused by infection. They need urgent treatment, usually antibiotics and repair, regardless of size, often in specialized centers. Inflammatory aneurysms involve swelling and scarring around the aorta, can cause pain and weight loss. Repair thresholds are similar, but managing the inflammation medically is also key. The less invasive repair is often preferred if possible for inflammatory ones.
And a few other aortic conditions were mentioned briefly.
Yeah, things like aortic dissection, a tear in the wall layers, intramural hematoma, blood in the wall, pseudoaneurysms, often from injury, or saccular aneurysms, like little outpouchings. These are different beasts, require specific evaluation, and sometimes have underlying genetic causes or links to injury.
That mention of genetics sounds important.
It really is. The sources emphasize that some aortic conditions are linked to inherited connective tissue disorders, like vascular Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, where blood vessels are inherently weaker.
So, if a genetic cause is suspected,
then genetic counseling and testing are really important, not just for the person diagnosed, but potentially for their close family members too, parents, siblings, children.
because others in the family might be at risk and not know it.
Precisely. Finding a genetic link can change management for the patient and allow relatives to be screened and managed proactively. These cases are complex, best handled by multidisciplinary teams in specialized centers. They even mention a specific drug, celiprolol, that can help reduce rupture risk in vascular Ehlers-Danlos.
Okay, so these guidelines cover a massive amount of ground, but they also honestly point out what isn't known yet, right? The unresolved issues.
Yeah, and that's a really valuable section. It shows where the research needs to go next. A big one is that much of the evidence we rely on comes from studies mainly in white men in developed countries.
So applying it directly to women or people of different ethnicities or different healthcare settings needs more study.
Exactly. The sources explicitly say data on outcomes specifically for women is lacking. They also point out that just measuring the aneurysm size, especially with ultrasound, can vary a bit between places, and that variability could affect treatment decisions. Consistency is key, but there's no single perfect method agreed globally.
What about medications?
More research needed there too. What's the precise role of antiplatelets? What are the absolute optimal blood pressure or cholesterol targets specifically for people with aneurysms? They call for more studies on these medical aspects.
And for the procedures?
Need more long-term data, especially on fixing those complex aneurysms and on the newer stent graft devices hitting the market. Are they cost-effective? Are the outcomes truly better long-term? They stress the need for high-quality, unbiased research.
And for the rarer types?
Yeah, for things like the saccular or mycotic aneurysms, we still don't fully understand their natural course or exact rupture risk. This means we might overtreat some or undertreat others simply because the evidence isn't strong enough yet to guide us perfectly.
So that unresolved issues section is a powerful reminder that medicine is always learning.
Absolutely. It drives the need for ongoing research.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you, the listener? These new guidelines give us the clearest picture yet of how doctors approach abdominal aortic aneurysms, from finding them early
To managing your overall health aggressively, which is so important.
to making those complex decisions about treatment for larger ones, and then the vital long-term follow-up.
Exactly. We've learned targeted screening saves lives in certain groups, that you have a lot of power in managing your risk factors, and that choosing between open surgery and the less invasive repair involves weighing different pros and cons based on evidence, your anatomy, and what matters to you.
It's genuinely fascinating how much we know, how technology is advancing, but also, as the guidelines openly state, how much is still based on evolving evidence or consensus, with key questions remaining.
It highlights the ongoing journey of medicine.
And here's where it gets really interesting. If these top experts are highlighting areas needing more research, especially for groups like women, or on genetic links, or cost-effectiveness, what responsibility does that create for us, as patients, as informed citizens? Should we be asking more questions, advocating for studies that fill those gaps so the guidelines can become even stronger for everyone? What stands out to you from this deep dive?
It really underscores that healthcare is a partnership, a continuous process of learning and adapting for everyone involved.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.